Okay.
Oh my goodness. Nneka's.
See you.
Okay. We are going to start this hour's conversation in just a very few minutes. This hour's conversation that is part of our SFC Next series of conversations. We'll start in just a few minutes. We are broadcasting live from World Wildlife headquarters in Washington, D.C., and we have joining us online Nneka Leiba from Environmental Working Group, and I see that you're here, Nneka.
I am.
Good. And we are expecting John Lucas to arrive any moment now, and then we'll give a bit of an introduction and get comfortable. And now we see that John Lucas has joined us. So we have all the players present. We will begin our introduction of this conversation. So I want to welcome you all to SFC Next. This is a series of conversations that we at Sustainable Furnishings Council have put together to help home furnishings companies think smarter about sustainability and to help consumers find the information and the products that they need. We are delighted to be helping consumers furnish their homes in a manner that is resource efficient and healthy. With the resources that we have on our website and the resources that this series of conversations is going to bring to us. My name is Susan Ingalls, and I direct Sustainable Furnishings Council. Sustainable Furnishings Council is a membership organization in the home furnishings industry. Our members are companies that are involved in the industry in various ways, and that includes suppliers of materials, manufacturers of product, stores where these products are sold, interior design firms that specify product, and international conservation organizations and other nonprofits who are also concerned with making sure best practices for sustainability are implemented in the home furnishings industry. I invite all of you to join us. To be a member. A company makes its own commitment to sustainability, a commitment to transparency, and a commitment to continuous improvement. And we make it our business to support companies in realizing their commitment. So we provide resources and guidance and education, and for companies that qualify, we provide marketing support. And those of you who are with us for this conversation who are not companies, I invite you to make sure you use the resources available on our website and the resources of the companies that are involved in this series of conversations. This series of conversations is SFC Next. And I invite you to send in your questions for today's panelists and for us by Google Chats, which you will be doing if you are on a Google channel watching this conversation, or by Twitter. And when you tweet, please use hashtag SFCNext. So I am looking forward to hearing what questions and what comments you have. We are very pleased to be broadcasting this set of conversations from World Wildlife Fund headquarters in Washington, D.C. We appreciate their sponsorship of this series, and we also appreciate the sponsorship of other sponsors, including Belfort Furniture, Norison, Leiba, McCreary Modern, Crescent Fine Furnishings, New York Now Artisan Resources, Room and Board, Long Bassett, Surya, Naturepedic, and Home Trends and Design. Thank you all for supporting this work and making these conversations available. This conversation is about moving towards safer chemicals in home furnishings. We're going to talk about what it takes to move towards safer chemicals for our home furnishings. And our conversation is going to be moderated today by Bryan McGannon, who is sitting here beside me at World Wildlife Fund. Thank you for being here, Bryan.
It's great to be here.
We also have with us Nneka, Leiba from the Environmental Working Group, and Don Lucas, who are joining us from their home offices. So I'm going to turn this conversation over for Bryan to lead it, which I will do by simply leaning back. Take it away, Bryan. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for hosting this event and for your leadership in the industry. It's vital, and it's great to see a great group of folks together here who are leading, and that's vital in the space of getting toxics out of our homes and all of our furnishings. So this panel is going to be looking at how the role of advocacy and public policy is going to work together to eliminate the use of hazardous substances in the furnishing sector. Nneka, Leiba from the Environmental Working Group, and Don Lucas with the Green Science Policy Institute are going to discuss the toxic impacts and the research and some of the policy activity around California's law on flame retardants. And then I will round out the presentation with what's happening at the federal level and what my organization, the American Sustainable Business Council, is doing to galvanize business support for meaningful reform at the federal level on toxic chemicals. So why don't I turn it over to Nneka, and we'll kick it off there.
Thanks, Bryan. Like was mentioned before, my name is Nneka Leiba, and I'm the Deputy Director of Research at Environmental Working Group. EWG is a nonprofit research and advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C., and we work to educate the public about chemical contaminants in their food, water, other products, as well as the environment, while simultaneously pushing for policies that will address these issues. We've been working on the toxicity of flame retardant chemicals since 2003. That year, we tested the breast milk of 20 American mothers for a class of toxic flame retardants known as PBDEs. And we found PBDEs in American mothers' breast milk at concentrations that were 75 times higher than the level of PBDEs in European mothers. So that obviously set off some red flags for us and raised some concerns. Since then, we have found PBDEs in umbilical cord blood, in house dust, and in 2008, we tested the blood of mothers and their toddlers for PBDEs, and we found them in toddlers at a level that was 3 times higher than in their mothers, which indicated to us that children had a higher level of exposure to these toxic chemicals. PUDEs have since been phased out across the U.S. Due to their toxicity concerns and because they're persistent and bioaccumulative. But they have been replaced with other chemicals, and the use of flame retardant chemicals have continued unabated. Some of the replacement chemicals, unfortunately, have also been linked to toxicity concerns. Weak toxic laws, as well as poorly designed flammability standards, are to blame for the widespread chronic exposure of the public to these potentially hazardous chemicals. Flame retardants in general are ubiquitous in upholstered furniture, largely in part due to TB 117, which is a California flammability regulation, which encouraged large use of these chemicals. TB 117 has since been changed, actually very recently, and the focus has switched. The testing protocols now focus on open flame sources rather than focus away from open flame sources towards smoldering sources, which is the largest cause for furniture fires. This change in the regulation will increase fire safety, as well as will reduce or eliminate the need for flame retardant chemicals. Given the new law, as well as the toxicity concerns, furniture makers and sellers should act quickly to develop this new market, which does not put these toxic chemicals into their furniture or sell products with these toxic chemicals in them. Ultimately, obviously, we would want to see a concerted effort by all the different branches of the supply chain to come together and improve public health by educating the public about the toxicity concerns of flame retardants, but also educating them about the benefits of buying furniture without flame retardant chemicals. We would like to see federal policies that ensure that chemicals are safe prior to putting them on the market. But until that happens, now is the time for the home furnishing industry to take control of this wheel and improve public health. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nneka. And so, Don, you were on the front lines of modernizing TB 117. So why don't you take it up from there and tell us about your experience and what the outcomes are from here.
Sure. Good morning from California. One of the things, and thank you, Nneka, for giving a good introduction. So one of the issues that has come up is about this idea of regrettable substitutions. As Nneka mentioned, PBDs have been banned now for years, but they're still in millions of pieces of home furnishings, and new chemicals come along that are still used as fire retardants. So the idea of trying to identify individual compounds and then determining their toxicity, determining whether they're safe, can take years, if not decades. So it's a real problem that we have to watch out for. As Nneka did mention, California has a new regulation, TB 117/2013, which went into effect on January 1st this year, which allows furniture manufacturers to sell furniture in California that has foam that does not contain any flame retardants, including halogenated flame retardants and others whose toxicity is questioned. One of the real issues, though, for the manufacturers is trying to explain it to the public, because it's a very confusing problem. I'm a PhD chemist. I work at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory where I study combustion, and it's a very complex subject that is really difficult. So what I found is we asked one of the manufacturers, and I think they're a very good manufacturer that is they're trying to do the right thing. And we were asked, one of the consumers asked, are there any flame retardants in your products and are they safe? And one of their examples was, what they said in an answer was that our foam products are treated Cal 117/2013 without chlorinated tris, TDCPP. And they also had some other statements in there that are very technical. But what I found interesting is that even there, a very simple statement like that, saying a treated product without tris. Well, first of all, chlorinated tris has been banned in California, or it's on the Prop 65 list, which is a cancer-causing chemical list. So you would have to have a label on your product saying that this product contains chemicals that are known or suspected to cause cancer. And I don't think anybody in the industry wants to sell furniture with the Prop 65 label. The second thing is that you don't have to treat the foam anymore in there. But there's still a lot of confusion. So I would ask you to do some things. One is to become educated about that. It's a complicated subject, but it's not just the flame retardants, but all of the other chemicals in your products. Don't assume that a product meets the regulations is safe. And this is a very important subject because initially people would look at the use of chemicals to say, are they legal? We move next onto this thing, is it safe? And it's really difficult to prove things are safe, especially in humans. So the real question to ask, is it necessary? And that's what we've been doing at the Green Science Policy Institute, is to look to see if we really don't need the chemicals for fire safety, and we've shown that they are not needed. The fire retardants really have no significant effect, no meaningful effect on fire safety, then you just don't have to use them. However, changing the regulations is not a simple thing. If you've seen the movie Toxic Hot Seat, you realize that it's been a multi-year effort. There's a lot of different industries involved, including the chemical manufacturers and their representatives, along with the industry. And I do want to applaud your people in your industry because you've been working with us and with the California regulators and others to get the California regulation changed. And we encourage you to keep doing that because it's really important to have the industry voice along with the scientists and working with researchers to produce chemicals or products without chemicals that are toxic. So one thing I would like you to do, if you can show the slide, the Green Science Policy Institute has come up with a class of chemicals, and 6 classes that include fluorinated chemicals, antimicrobials, flame retardants, endocrine disrupting plastics, solvents, and heavy metals. And we have a webinar series. They're very short, about 10 to 15 minutes each, that explain this, and it's designed for people like you to understand and start learning about these chemicals and learning about ways to remove them from your products. So if you can show the slide, it's easier than me reading the website.
It would be great if I could show the slide. I'm afraid one of our several technical difficulties has made it impossible for me to show you the slide.
Okay.
However, I can tell everybody the website is very easy to remember. It's 6classes.org, SIXCLASSES.org. And it is about, as Don will tell us, 6 classes of chemicals. So 6classes.org.
Right. And you can also go to Green Science Policy Institute.org, and we have a lot of information about the new California regulations, including links to manufacturers' pages and to the California question and answers, because we found the industry had a lot of questions about the new regulations in California. There's a lot of confusion. We're trying to help people work on that. So thank you.
Thanks, Don. That's great, and we'll come back to dive a little deeper on the California work. So let me jump back. Again, I'm Bryan McGannon with the American Sustainable Business Council. And our organization is a council of business organizations and businesses, and we're proud to have the Sustainable Furnishing Council as one of our partner organizations. And our broader mission is to build a sustainable economy. So it's how do we implement the business voice across a number of issues that all work together. Now, safer chemicals has been one of our priority issues from our founding about 5 years ago. And so we've been actively working at the federal level and increasingly at the state level to modernize our toxic chemical laws. The focus of my work, and I'm based in Washington, is on TSCA reform, the Toxic Substances Control Act. And that is the 40-year-old law that has not been modernized once. It's one of the last remaining environmental laws that has not been modernized or improved upon. And I think it's fairly unanimous across all sectors that have impact with toxic chemicals that the law doesn't work. chemicals can go into commerce rather easily without having any demonstration of their safety, and information about that safety is not easily available, and in many cases it's not available at all. And so from a business perspective, it's vital that this law gets modernized, and it gets modernized in the right way to have meaningful reform that protects individuals as well as drives innovation for cleaner and safer products. So I'll give you a little bit of background of what's happening in Washington this year. Both the Senate and the House have taken up legislation, and at the beginning of the year, the beginning of the two-year legislative cycle, that there was a lot of optimism that this could be the year that there would be a breakthrough to fix this law. Senator Lautenberg from New Jersey, the late Senator Lautenberg, had been a vocal leader on modernizing TSCA, and he had introduced the Safe Chemicals Act, which was a pretty strident effort to modernize the law. And later, so in April of 2000, my year's right, 13, he joined forces with Senator Vitter, who was the ranking Republican on the Environment and Public Works Committee, where this bill would move through, and put together a compromise bill called the Chemical Safety Improvement Act. And there was a number of original co-sponsors, a bipartisan group of senators. And so there was a lot of initial optimism that this was going to be a major breakthrough. But after taking a close look at what was in the bill, it became increasingly clear that the chemical industry in Senator Vitter's office really had a much heavier hand in authoring this legislation, and there were a number of very serious concerns that I think a lot of people didn't realize what was in the bill when they signed on to it. So we've been working since that introduction to identify those places of concern, to seek if there was room for improvement. Shortly after the bill was introduced, Senator Lautenberg unfortunately passed away, and Senator Udall from New Mexico picked up the mantle and started working with Senator Vitter's office to help kind of drive the process forward, find opportunities to improve the bill from the stakeholder input. And one of the, another community that we work with is the Safer Chemicals Healthy Families Coalition, which is a very broad environmental health coalition of over 400 organizations. And so we've been hoping that process would be making progress. To this day, we know that they have been making incremental steps towards a better bill, but there are still some really large problems, significant problems that the chemical industry, through Senator Vitter, refuses to budge on. And at the end of the day, what the largest, where we're at today is that Senator Barbara Boxer from California is the chair of the EPW committee, and the chair, wields the power, and nothing moves in her committee unless she is on board with it. She has very serious concerns with this bill, most prominently around the state preemption language, which would preempt all state laws around chemicals, and she's, so we are watching to see what she is doing. She's made statements that she's very interested in doing a chemical reform, but time is running out in this legislative session, and a lot of folks are going for re-election, and so we call it the silly season here in Washington. So not much legislating gets done. So we are urging her to step up and even if it is not a comprehensive bill, but maybe find some areas of common ground that can make a difference. We are encouraging her to do that in our work. So in the House, a even more kind of severe bill was introduced by Congressman John Shimkus from Illinois. They had a number of hearings leading up to the introduction of the bill, which gave a lot of people some optimism that there was going to be some progress made, and it was, very fair hearings, very balanced. So there was a lot of listening. Unfortunately, they weren't hearing a lot of that input when they drafted the bill. Again, it was a very heavy-handed, chemical industry-focused bill. It's called the Chemicals and Commerce Act, in fact, and the word safety only appears 2 or 3 times in the entire bill. So, again, we had some very major concerns with that, and so we've been very active in trying to either improve that bill or make sure that it doesn't proceed. The rules are a little different in the House, so they can push through things a lot easier. If they have the desire to take it to the floor and vote as it is, they can do that. So I don't want to get too far in the weeds on that. But what my organization has been doing has been organizing the business support for meaningful reform. And we've joined forces with a number of our business members to create a coalition called the Companies for Safer Chemicals. Right now we've up to about 180 companies, including the Sustainable Furnishing Council, who've endorsed the principles that we are going to be advocating for, which are pretty simple, high-level principles that we believe need to be in any legislation that moves forward, and that includes a strong safety standard. So it's not based on cost; it's based on the safety information that chemicals must demonstrate before they're allowed into commerce. Transparency is a very big piece of this. It's very complex within this legislation, but we think that the chemical manufacturers should err on the side of putting as much safety information into the public domain, so that the supply chain can know what's in the products downstream. And that information, will help consumers make better choices and drive the marketplace that way. And ultimately, legislation that needs to drive innovation. Currently, these bills are more protective of entrenched industries, as opposed to driving solutions of getting the worst chemicals off the marketplace and incentivizing researchers and innovators to develop safer alternatives, whether it's through green chemistry or renewable chemistry, to find those safer alternatives and get those into commerce as fast as we can. So that's what I have, and so I think it's a great time to open up for some questions, or we can start the conversation.
Good. Let's see what questions we have in, because it does look like we have some questions. So, question for Bryan or Don. Don has just said that you can't assume a product is safe because it meets regulations. What standard would you recommend in lieu of relying on the congressional bill that may emerge? So let's ask you comment, and then I bet our panelists will have comments. What standard would you recommend in lieu of relying on the congressional bill that may emerge?
That's a very good question. I think that there's a number of ways to look at it. There's a lot of companies are doing innovative things. A lot of the companies in our network are doing a lot of innovative things, who are demonstrating on their labels of what their product ingredients, and looking at ingredients and materials. It is an incredible challenge for consumers and businesses throughout the supply chain to know without having any, being forced to put that information on their products. But in many cases, it's consumer education and asking questions of the retailers and manufacturers. I think it's probably one of the best paths to go in the absence of a robust regulatory system.
Thank you. One of the, Don, I'm going to turn to you. because I did watch the 6 classes series of webinars as they aired live, and it did have me and others I know trotting home to read labels. So that 6 classes series of webinars decides or describes, I should say, 6 classes of chemicals. Can you tell us what those 6 classes are and give us an idea of where we might find some of those?
Sure. The 6 classes we've identified are fluorinated chemicals. So these are some of the products used in making Teflon that have been found to be quite dangerous. The second is antimicrobials, sort of, silver nanoparticles and some of the chlorinated species used for hand disinfectants. The flame retardants, as we talked about, and I'll jump back on that in a little bit. Endocrine disrupting plasticizers, the materials used to make plastic soft, like the water bottles, bisphenol A, some other chemicals like that. Organic solvents that are often used in manufacturing processes, and heavy metals such as lead and mercury. So those we've identified sort of in 6 classes where these are chemicals that sometimes they're needed and sometimes they're not toxic or harmful, but you might want to look at them. In terms of going back to the question on the regulations, I think it's a really interesting subject. For instance, in TB 117 2013, even though we considered that a very good improvement over the old bill, you should realize that it does not ban certain chemicals. It says nothing about chemicals. It just talks about a performance standard. So you could have a product with the TB 117 2013 label on it that has more flame retardants than under the old label, because it'll still meet the standard. And so this is a real question for manufacturers. You can meet the standard under a certain bill, but it's really up to you to decide whether you want to go without the chemicals that are not needed. And it's one of the problems with most of the bills, because of the way the laws are written. It's really, California can't ban individual chemicals because that's under the purview of the bureau that was doing it. It's a very complicated issue, but we have to be aware of what is going on with TSCA reform and in other states. So legislation in other states trying to make sure that there's a uniform regulation, and I'm hoping people will follow the new California regulation then, instead of coming up with their own, because that really would complicate things for the industry, especially your industry. So I think there's a lot of issues there, and I wish the TSCA reform, but as Bryan said, I'm not convinced that the new bill is all that much better.
Thank you. Let's turn to you, Nneka.
We have a question here in the boardroom.
We have a question in the boardroom then. Let's move. Maybe it's a question producer. We'll turn to you then. What's the question, please?
Do we know what the #1 cause of house fires is, and what percentage that is?
The question is, what is the #1 cause of house fires?
Oh, I'm not 100% sure of that. I know that in California they switched the focus from open flame to smoldering because they thought that that was a lead-in cause of fires, but I can't speak anymore to that issue.
They did say in the film Toxicity, which we saw last night, it was mentioned that that most house fires start from cigarettes, and that it may be changing over time, but that is what is publicized.
The reason I ask that is, as
Let
a
me-
furniture manufacturer, it is absolutely insane what we were going through with foam and fabric and creating a wall under the fabric, and perhaps the best environmental fabrics, all cotton fabrics, are going to become one of the biggest problems in California. It is just insane. Why not lobby to outlaw smoking cigarettes at home and having candles at home? And I'm really thinking of taking candles off sale at our store. I know it sounds so crazy, but it is crazy. I mean, we are completely crazed making furniture that doesn't create a bad fire situation at home, but yet the behavior that creates it is just okay to continue with.
Mitchell's correct. It's easier to have polyester fabric pass Cal 117 than it is cotton.
Yeah. Just so people can smoke at home and start a fire, or light a menorah and have the have the candles tip over because these people, people leave the room and then a fire starts.
So I agree with those statements, because to me, as a combustion scientist, I look at the ignition sources. So for years, the cigarette industry fought fire-safe cigarettes because they didn't want to change the way the smoke, how a smoker felt about pulling on a cigarette. And we know that the fire-safe cigarettes can help quite a bit. I agree, it's candles. Why aren't we banning these things? The idea of using smoke detectors is really a good one, or sprinklers. And you'll find that certain parts of the building industry are opposed to putting in sprinklers, but we know, for instance, that sprinklers are probably the most single effective firefighting tool that we have, rather than adding fire retardant chemicals to the furniture. I think the furniture industry was singled out pretty much unfairly by the campaign, and if you watch Advocacy, you could probably learn more from there than me explaining it quickly. But there's a lot of money involved, a lot of different industries, and it's a very difficult problem.
And I just want to add, and this maybe lead us into another section of the conversation, is that I think these the experience in California and both and what's happening in Washington demonstrates the incredible value and the necessity for businesses that are leading the way, like this group is, to be vocal and be active and advocate and educate policymakers that it's incredibly valuable to hear for them to hear from you, who are making these products and avoiding these chemicals and have the first-hand experience. Otherwise, we're drowned out. I mean, it's pretty obvious that the vested interests put a lot of money into their lobbying and their campaign spending. But I believe the facts are on our side, and we have great stories to tell, and there's a lot of interest. And I think a lot of the sustainable business movement is neither progressive nor conservative. It's a it's a genuinely new way of thinking, and I've experienced on Capitol Hill that there's a kind of a thirst for this kind of new way of thinking. These profit-making organizations who see that there's this need. So I just want to, it's my pitch to you to find a way to take action, and we certainly work with the SFC to find ways to activate your members. But it's vital in whatever state you're in talking to your state legislators, talking to your federal legislators, because we do know that the states, in the absence of the federal government taking any action on the federal level, the states are going to act. And I think this year there was 33 state laws on some form of chemical regulation. But it is vital to have your voice in the dialogue.
Yeah, thank you.
We have a couple more questions in the boardroom.
Good.
This is a fascinating panel. It's Mike Italiano. Really appreciate all your hard work. I wanted to make a comment and a question. One of the things we've learned is that in the 40 years of environmental regulation, the federal government has taken a strong lead. We have 30 environmental statutes, thousands of regulations. When you look at market adoption, right now, they're kind of maxed out. When you look at the early adopters in terms of who's moving forward now, it's not the federal government. Corey Brinkman said that, okay, FSC was created because governments couldn't act. We know that government can't do anything with climate change, so the markets are starting to work. What I heard when you said that there were, and we have the problem Mitchell mentioned, which is just confusing regulations that don't make any sense. So government is kind of, at least the federal level, a lot of extent the state level, that they're maxed out, they're not early adopters. Local governments are. So when you mentioned that in your work on TSCA reform, you've got, I don't know, 100 of your companies that are lined up in support of that. I was wondering whether there's any interest to kind of hedge your bets. I mean, you need to keep working on TSCA, but that's tough work. Can you take that momentum and that support by those companies and bring it into like the Furnishings Council and say, okay, we have these companies. How can we then translate that into a marketplace label or a marketplace solution, and that'll have a synergistic effect on what you're doing with lobbying in Congress, because you have all those companies who want to do something. We have all these people here, and that's why LEAD is working. LEAD is doing a lot of stuff on toxicity. As a matter of fact, they got 40 chemically dominated trade associations proposing with a $5 million a year budget, and that shows that okay, LEAD is working; it's getting their attention. Is that something that you think is worth having another conversation about?
I think that's a fantastic idea, currently, the marketplace is driving a lot of the change. Consumer demand and consumer awareness about the impact of toxics in their lives is driving a lot of the change in the marketplace. There's companies in our network, like Seventh Generation and Method, both cleaning product companies, but Naturepedic also, who are succeeding because consumers are becoming educated on their own, and through great work like EWG and Green Sciences Policy Institute, the education work that they're doing. So the marketplace is driving that. So it's an interesting idea, but there's a flip side of that, and a number of our members have talked about labeling programs, and especially in the toxic chemical space, there are a number of labeling programs out there, and some of our members are saying that, frankly, their consumer research is showing that it's confusing. They don't know who to trust. There's this kind of this disinformation campaign, the greenwashing, and so that presents a real challenge. But I think that you are onto something that some effort of driving it in the absence of regulation or modernization is a smart conversation to be having, and I think that would be a wonderful thing that would work with SFC and start developing that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to echo that sentiment from Don. I think the people in that room, the furniture makers and manufacturers and sellers, are the most educated about this issue. And once that education is transferred to the consumer, a lot can happen without federal legislation. We've seen it in other spheres. We've seen it in cosmetics. We've seen it in cleaners. We've seen it all over. And so if the home furnishing industry galvanizes itself, a lot can be done, and I think that's an awesome way to move this debate forward.
Okay. And so I think maybe one more kind of question in the last couple minutes we have is to ask Don and Nneka, where do you see kind of the next battles happening, or what should folks start be watching for in the next few years? California is clearly a leader in a lot of spaces. Are other states going to follow suit? Are they going to improve upon what California has done, or where do you think things are going to go?
Okay, I'll jump in first. That's okay. So in California, not only are we working there's going to be a second step of the TB 117/2013, which is a study on the open flame standard. So the furniture issue in California has not changed yet. We are working with some other states to try to get them to conform with the California standards. One thing we are concerned about is how some institutions, including the CPSC, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, and Underwriters Laboratory, are pushing. Some of the scientists are, and I think they're good-hearted, but they're pushing for a large open flame standard, which would almost virtually require flame retardants to be back into the furniture, maybe even in higher concentration. So that's something I think that it's on our radar screen, and we hope it's on yours too. So we want to make sure that we're maintaining fire safety without requiring the use of chemicals, and being careful that new standards don't come in that will not have that happen.
Yeah, we're also concerned about the CPSC stance right now and what that's going to lead to, but we're hopeful that the next steps will be consumer education and consumers looking for labels that say this product does not contain harmful, toxic flame retardants, and driving that market. There probably will be movement in other states. I haven't seen any evidence of that yet. So I think it's going to be driven, the change is going to be driven by the industry educating the public and the public driving the market.
Which suggests that it would be really great if everybody would support the California State Bill 1019, which will make FR chemical use to achieve that 117/2013 that we've been talking about. When you use FR chemicals to achieve that compliance with that bulletin, you would have to label the product as containing FR chemicals or not. That would be a simple, people go to the furniture store knowing that FR chemicals are what they're looking for. And so if the furniture had to be labeled, that could be helpful.
We have more questions in the boardroom.
Okay, let's turn back to the boardroom and see what questions we have there.
I have a question. As an interior designer, I'm trying to identify resources that would enable someone to be able to go into an environment and test whether or not the air quality is toxic. Now, I know you've done testing on the individuals with the breast milk and the toddlers, but are there any resources that would enable someone like me to go in and be able to go up to a sofa or a carpet or wallpaper or anything and be able to like a Geiger counter, you know, right? Be able to say, oh, this one's really toxic.
Hopefully it's not radioactive.
What do you say?
We hope it's not radioactive.
Oh, right. Well, you know.
So I'm not aware of any such tool that would be a very useful tool. We know that flame retardants are often on the furniture itself, and then it settles in the dust. And we've tested the dust, but I don't know if they have anything that is in the form where a consumer can easily go and test, or something more cost-effective. The testing that we do, obviously, is large-scale laboratory testing, and it may not be suitable for, you know, the public. But we have done, like you had mentioned, some biomonitoring stuff, but nothing at point of use per se. We may not be there. I don't know if the science or the technology is at that point yet.
Yeah, there are really no simple analytical techniques for the consumer. It's even hard for researchers because in some cases there's new chemicals being introduced and we can't get analytical samples to calibrate our instruments. So that's an interesting point. We often don't know what's in the chemicals, and we have to sort of reverse engineer from samples that we get from them to find out what they're putting in. So the answer is no, there's no simple technique.
Is there another question in the room?
I have a question, because Mike in the previous panel had mentioned lead points have come up a number of times. I think one of the problems in the residential market is there's no measurable. You can't say, you know, this this chemistry or this series of foam and fabric and barrier has a rating of, or it contributes points to. Wouldn't it be a lot easier if we had some kind of measurable that would say, here is an acceptable amount of environmentally sound, sustainable practices that go into this end product? Is there anything on the horizon that even leads us to that?
You know, that might have to be sector by sector, and then you also have this problem that Nneka touched on, is the bioaccumulation. That you have exposures from your household materials to your cleaning materials to mattresses to all sorts of walks of your life that are inputs into that impact your health. And then of course there's vulnerable populations. There's outdoor population, things to factor in. So I think that kind of existing industry kind of says, well, our product only has this much of of the toxic material, and that by itself won't hurt you. But taken in total of a normal person's life, that's what causes a lot of challenges. So I think a very valid point of trying to identify metrics, but I think it presents a big challenge, and there's certainly I don't see anything in the horizon, at least in the policy front.
However, we at Sustainable Furnishings Council have our exemplary membership, our exemplary recognition for our manufacturer members, which does have measurables on several of the things that we've been talking about today. And it is this is something that we are working to continuously improve, and I invite all of you who are interested to get involved with us on this, on our efforts to improve our standards for recognizing manufacturers as exemplary. They need to prove things to us. They need to do it in various ways. And so sometimes there is a third-party certification for what they are proving to us. For instance, Forest Stewardship Council certification would be an acceptable proof that your wood is coming from, is being legally harvested from well-managed forests, but that's not the only way you could prove it to us. So we don't have just one way of proving some of the things that are in our standard, but we have identified a lot of the things that are significant for furnishings, and avoiding VOCs in finishes is a really, really big one. When we were, someone asked, how do you tell if indoor air quality is poor? One way you tell is by your nose. If you walk into a place where there is a lot of new product and it smells that new product smell, you are smelling the volatile organic compounds. The volatilizing is what you're experiencing. So that is one that we've been able to say, you've got to have, you've got to be careful of the VOCs. Finishes are a big deal in furnishings, but there are a lot of other things that are more hidden, and I love that this conversation is bringing out this concern, and I really, really do hope that more of you will get involved as we continue to find ways to educate home furnishings consumers about what our members and others have in offer, and about the wonderful information available through 6classes.org and through the Environmental Working Group, and the big difference it makes to get involved in our democracy, and to, of course, work with the American Sustainable Business Council on this and other issues that y'all work on. I am noticing that we're coming to the end of our allotted time for this conversation. So want to invite everybody to stay involved on this conversation by communicating with us at Sustainable Furnishings Council, as well as, of course, with our brilliant panelists. And I invite you all to join us for the next conversation, which starts just at the top of the hour. The next conversation is about innovations in materials. And our featured guest in that conversation is Gavin McIntyre, who is the co-founder of Ecovative. We'll be talking about that material, especially this mycelium this material that they grow from mycelium. So join us for that conversation at the top of the hour, and thank you for having been part of this conversation. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Nneka. Thank you, Don.
Bye.
Bye.